Hello. So my name is David Bytow, and this is Always Be Coding. There's a lot of sirens out there. Well, the question I get pretty often is not just how I got into the industry and worked at all these great places without a college degree, but how did I, or why did I not go to college? Like, why not, right? Especially if you're interested in computer science and you're interested in learning, of course you should perhaps go to learn as much as possible. For me, it wasn't that easy. It wasn't that I had a choice, really. I actually didn't have a very good GPA in high school. It was around 2.5, mostly because, in high school, I would stay up pretty late programming, and most of the time I was just exhausted throughout the day, and I just didn't engage, especially with classes, most classes that I just didn't see, they just didn't excite me in that moment. And I was always thinking about other things. I'd always have my piece of paper and pencil and trying to solve some programming problem or something around, something I was thinking about at that time. And I just have pages and pages of notes and different things I was trying. So essentially what I did when I was 17 is I got a job at a comic shop I was working on, I knew the guy wanted a website, right? It's called Crazy Eddie's Comics in Munster, Indiana. And he said, hey, do you know how CGI? Do you know how to do this and that? And I said, yeah, of course, no problem. Of course, I wasn't really a web programmer. But I signed up anyway, and he hired me for like $9 an hour at that point. And I learned the LAMP stack. I learned, Linux and MySQL and Apache and PHP, and I built a little website. It was like an Amazon-like clone at that point. Amazon was still pretty young, and it had the tabs across the top and stuff. And so I basically recreated that, and that worked out well. It was ecrazyeddies.com, and he got a lot of revenue from that, obviously outside of just that brick and mortar store. And so I learned a lot there, and I parlayed that into another job local in Indiana, actually, which was the town of Cherville, making the town of Cherville, Indiana's website. But while I was doing that, I convinced the company, hey, look, why don't you pay me and I will make a game and we'll sell it shareware. And I sold them on this model. And so they agreed to do it. And while I was doing that, I was working on a little game, working on this game where it was kind of like a Quake in space, top-down type of thing. And there was another company in Irvine, California that was working on a similar game, and they had reached out to me and said, hey, we see you're working on this thing, we're working on it too, so you shouldn't do that. And I actually formed a relationship with them. I actually then told them, look, well, it's just a fun little project, and hey, your website sucks, let me rebuild it. And they offered me a job actually for $40,000 a year to come out to California. And, that was kind of my ticket out there. And I went for it, right? Because it was an opportunity. And I spent about 7 months at that company. They actually promoted me to as lead programmer. I was 19 years old working on this Xbox Live, one of the first Xbox Live games. But that company quickly folded. Still, that 7 months of experience was enough to get my foot in the door and send my resume out to a lot more companies. And it turned out that I interviewed after that with Goldman Sachs. It was the first time I flew out to New York when I was 19 years old. I flew out for 8 hours, and I wouldn't return to New York City until I was 30. And now, of course, I live here. But so I had an offer from Goldman Sachs, and I had an offer from another game studio back out in Irvine, California. And that was for, I think, $55,000 a year. And this was a legit company, and I would go on to spend about 5 years in that company and make various Xbox and PS2 games like Indiana Jones. They worked on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which was a great game on Xbox. My first title was Wrath Unleashed, which not many people played, but I enjoyed making it. It was a LucasArts game. Then I worked on the Star Wars project in DaVinci Code. I was lead programmer of, and so I spent a lot of time coding, a lot of time. That's where I really learned a lot. And then I took that experience and and turned that into, sending my resume into Google and saying like, look, hey, I got 5-6 years of experience, you should hire me. And sure enough, they hired me as passed the interview, which is a separate topic. I have another video on that, but I was hired as a senior engineer. And I was, 25 or 26 at the time. And so that was, that was kind of my way. But the whole point here is that two things. I kind of was a bit of a fake it till you make it type story. I definitely put myself out there thinking I could do the job or explaining how I could do the job, and still not quite, once they would say, yeah, let's do it, then I would work really hard to learn the things I needed to learn. I had that skin in the game, and I think that's incredibly powerful. And then I compounded everything, right? Like I found ways when I was at the comic shop to work on a thing, when I was in the, when I was at this it was electric company actually, building town websites to make a game, and just kind of, building on it. And then I eventually, once I got into Google, then that opened up basically most doors. Companies like Google on your resume are very powerful from there. And so, but there's whole other stories from there, based on that. But yeah, so look, if I can do that from Northwest Indiana, and working at a comic shop on websites and whatnot, and I don't think there's anything really that special about me other than I had the will and the intelligence, at least raw materials, to learn and be a sponge and apply it, and had that love and passion for programming. But like I said, it was work, and every day I'm still learning something new, 20 years later, almost 20 years later. So anyway, that's the story. Happy to go into more detail about these things, talk about other companies I worked at. But if you like this video, please leave a like or comment or subscribe. I would love to hear from you. And until then, always be coding.